think I want to talk about Bitcoin from the perspective of the misfits, the weirdos, the freaks, the people who refuse to think the way everybody else thinks, the people who see a half-working, elegant technology and don't look at the half-working, they look at the elegant side. And they recognize innovation. And they recognize innovation not just a few months or a few years before others, but sometimes a decade before others recognize innovation. Bitcoin is unexpected. Bitcoin is not money as we know it. Bitcoin should not have happened. Bitcoin really has no possibility of success. It can't possibly work. It's one of those things that does not work in theory, but it works in practice. Like Wikipedia, like Linux, like the internet. Weird ideas made by people with ponytails and neckbeards, weirdos who nobody really trusts. And Bitcoin succeeds because it works, because as a technology, it's elegant. So I want to talk about that spirit of the misfit, walking into an industry and saying, you know what? We're about to change everything, and being laughed out of the room, and then keeping on and going on until in fact, they change everything. And this happens in technology all the time. We just forget about it. We ignore it. We rewrite the history. It all looks glowing. This video we just watched about the early automobile. Do you know what the media said about the early automobile? They ridiculed cars. They mocked cars. Cars were slower than horses. Cars broke down all the time. Cars needed expensive gasoline that you couldn't find anywhere, and they required enormous amounts of infrastructure to work. And so the media focused on the part of the story that sold the most papers. Car accidents, pedestrians mangled by cars. And for more than 2 decades from the first cars, the story was that of infernal, disgusting, dirty, noisy machines that were far inferior to horses, that couldn't go anywhere, that only weirdos would use, and that most of the time killed the occupants and everyone who came anywhere near them. This hysteria got so bad that in 1896, in the UK, they passed a law called the Red Flag Act. And the Red Flag Act was a law that required that any operator of a vehicle had 3 crew members on staff: a driver, an engineer, and a flagman. The driver would operate the vehicle, the engineer would supervise that operation, think railroads, right? And the flagman would carry a red flag and run 100 yards ahead of the car to warn pedestrians of the imminent arrival of an infernal death machine that was going to mow them down. Guess what happened to the UK? They lost the automobile industry race because they saw that technology, and instead of seeing potential, they allowed fear to define their reaction. And so they created an environment where a car could not do the things that a car can do. Because if you make a car go as slow as the pedestrian who's running ahead of it with a red flag, you lose all of the advantage of a car. If a car requires a 3-person crew to operate, you lose the advantages of a car. So they tried to take the car and understand it from the perspective of railroads and horses, and they failed. And they lost the race. And what you didn't see on this video was that actually until that time, they were winning. The first really practical cars were built in England. Because they'd already won the race to the Industrial Revolution with a steam engine. At that time, England was a powerhouse of industrial innovation. And they were winning until they decided that this dirty machine should be confined to a very limited space and a set of rules. And they killed the goose. No more golden eggs for them. So that is instructive because this happens again and again in technology. When electricity was first domesticated and people started electrifying their homes, do you think the media went out and said, "This is brilliant. Edison's a genius. This is going to change the world"? No. What they said was that this was dangerous technology that would burn down people's homes. And they ran story after story after story about people getting electrocuted, about homes burning down. And of course, you couldn't really use electricity because it required a complete overhaul of your house. So you had to put wires in your house, the wires that would burn it down. And you would have to buy special devices to connect to these wires just before your house burned down. And only the rich could afford it. So clearly this was a technology that was really just an affectation of the rich. It was just a plaything with no practical value. The mayor of Paris during the Paris Fair in 1896, I believe, said, "After the fair is over, this fad of electricity will be forgotten as quickly as the lights turn off." Famous last words are very common in technology. Words that in retrospect look ridiculous. Like the head of IBM who once said, "I foresee a need for no more than 5 computers worldwide." Like the people who said that the telephone will never succeed. Well, guess what people are saying about Bitcoin? They're telling you that it is a technology that is weird and complicated, a technology that caters to misfits, drug dealers, degenerates, pornographers, terrorists, thieves, swindlers. I don't see any of those people in this room, but we better be careful just in case they show up. Of course, they're wrong. Bitcoin is none of those things. Bitcoin is simply a technology. And as a technology, it is often, the first use it finds is often in the hands of criminals. The first cars were used as getaway vehicles. The first telephones were used to plot conspiracy. The first telegrams were used to run long-distance mail fraud schemes and Ponzi schemes. And the first forms of electricity were used to run medical hoaxes and scam people. These things always happen with any new technology. And so they happen with Bitcoin too.